Unit 7, Hodgson's Theory of Mind. Section 1, Rehabilitating a Human Dimension. In his major work, Mind Matters, David Hodgson proposes a theory of mind which he describes as, in one sense, dualist interactionist, in another sense, monist. It also gives the beginnings of an account of free will. He points out that earlier quantum theories of consciousness have focused on indeterminacy as providing possible room for free will. However, in addition to this, Hodgson's theory concentrates on the possibility of more fundamental quantum claims that matter is ultimately non-material and non-local, and perhaps that mind and matter are interdependent. Hodgson summarizes this position in 3 propositions. 1. Just as the macroscopic physical events of neural firings are manifestations of micro-events of the quantum world, so also mental events are related more directly to those quantum events than to the neural firings themselves. 2. Even the best objective description of events as physical events, that is, in their objective character, comprehending all the insights of quantum theory, cannot account for all the properties of mental events, in particular, all their causal properties. And 3, the best description of the events as mental events, that is, in their subjective character, must use the language and concepts of folk psychology, which can, of course, be improved and refined. Let me try to elucidate Hodgson's somewhat cumbersome formulation of these 3 propositions as follows. 1. The physical macroscopic events of a neural firing are based on quantum micro-events in just the same way as the mental events associated with those physical neural events. But contrary to conventional mechanistic views, the mental events are more closely related to the quantum events than the physical events. 2. Even the best contemporary scientific accounts of the physical events of a neural firing, even those which recognize quantum mechanics, still can't fully explain the associated mental events. Such conventional scientific accounts especially fail to explain the causal properties of mental events. 3. Given points 1 and 2, it remains the case that the best description of mental events available to us is still folk psychology, i.e., our everyday way of thinking about mind and consciousness, though of course the language and concepts of folk psychology could be made much more sophisticated and precise. Taken together, what these propositions are suggesting is that A, there is a monist quantum reality which underlies both the physical and the mental manifestations of the brain and is the effective cause of both. And B, the mental processes which emerge from this monist dual aspect brain have much more in common with our everyday thinking about mind and consciousness than they do with the modern scientific consensus view of mind and consciousness. Classical physics, perhaps with some quantum mechanical trimmings, is, according to Hodgson, quite adequate in order to give a complete and fundamental account of physical events, except that is for events within the brain. Hodgson explains that, in theory, the complexity of many particle quantum systems should make a classical account impossible. In practice, however, a classical account is in fact adequate because the developments of the quantum physical states are such that indeterminacies, interference effects, EPR correlations, and such like quantum physical properties make no detectable difference to what happens. But the big and important exception to this is events in the brain. This is because, as Hodgson says, that classical physics is substantially inadequate if one wishes to explain the mental events involved. A description in terms of macroscopic matter and events is not only insufficient, it is also possibly misleading, inter alia, in suggesting a gulf between the physical and the mental. In order to identify the physical types with the best correlation to mental events, it is necessary to go to the quantum level. By way of explanation, Hodgson says a brain mind, or a person, is a physical mental object. Its behavior seems to be determined to some extent by mental events, choices based on beliefs, desires, etc., and to some extent by physical events, the objective brain processes of neural firings, etc. He concedes that the success of the objective sciences suggests that human behavior might be completely determined by physical events. Were this true, the apparent causal power of mental events would be either an illusion or else simply based on coincidences with physical events. These assumptions give rise to the hard science project of abstracting measurable physical properties of human behavior and then seeking quantitative physical laws of nature. According to the hard science project, these laws should be sufficient to explain and even control behavior. But Hodgson insists that when that project is pursued to the limit, it becomes clear that the physical properties and laws are not sufficient to determine completely the behavior of the brain-mind because of quantum indeterminism. It may still be possible to exclude independent mental determination, however, by showing that quantum indeterminism has no significant impact on the behavior of the brain-mind. For example, by showing that the firing of neurons cannot be affected by quantum indeterminism, or by success in cognitive psychology and or artificial intelligence research in accounting for all purposive behavior. This has not been done, so one may reasonably believe that mental events do have an independent determinative role in behavior. The core of Hodgson's quantum explanation of consciousness is to argue that mind and brain are both manifestations of the same underlying reality. Mind can, to some extent, be said to be a function of the brain, but only if the brain here is understood not as the detectable macroscopic object, but as the quantum reality underlying both this object and the mental events of consciousness. Mind and brain are two manifestations of and viewpoints towards a single reality, but with important differences. In particular, in relation to the development over time of this reality, and specifically the causes and explanations of such development. As David Bohm says, thought processes and quantum systems are analogous in that they cannot be analyzed too much in terms of distinct elements, because the intrinsic nature of each element is not a property existing separately and independently of other elements, but is instead a property that arises partially from its relation with other elements. Penrose also invokes quantum explanations for the operations of the mind-brain, but at a somewhat lower ontological level. He says, quantum physics involves many highly intriguing and mysterious kinds of behavior. Not the least of these are the non-local quantum correlations which can occur over widely separated distances. It seems to me to be a definite possibility that such things could be playing a role in conscious thought modes. Perhaps it is not too fanciful to suggest that quantum correlations could be playing an operative role over large regions of the brain. Might there be any relation between a state of awareness and a highly coherent quantum state in the brain? Is the oneness or globality that seems to be a feature of consciousness connected with this? It is somewhat tempting to believe so. Note here that Penrose seems to be using a thoroughly physical model of the brain as a basis for mind. This physical brain may, however, be influenced over large regions by quantum correlations. Hodgson, on the other hand, is promoting a much more ontologically thorough vision of the brain-mind. I suggest that because of the common underlying substratum, there will be significant correlations between certain types of macrophysical events, such as patterns of firings of neurons in the visual cortex, and certain types of mental events, such as perceptions of particular shapes and colors. In particular, even if patterns could be artificially created, which apparently have the same functional role as do the natural patterns in a neural network, the same types of mental events will not occur unless appropriate developments of quantum states also occur. So rather than the physical brain underpinning the mind, both it and the mind are manifestations of a common underlying substratum.